What if this were all happening right now? What if Luke Skywalker were fighting against the Death Star and trying to rescue a princess?
Terminator, immediately.
What if you could go with them?
Come on!
Well, you can. Tomorrow at a theater near you. Star Wars, rated PG.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone, and joining me I have James. Say hello, James.
Hello, hello.
Well, today we are going to be hitting a subject, a Star Wars subject, one of our favorite subjects to talk about, of a specific, I guess you could call it a form of EU. I mean, you know, anytime you veer away in the slightest from either a television show or a cartoon or specifically a movie, you know, you're dealing in the EU. Now, in the past, we've done some comparisons of how something like the Marvel comic adaptation of Star Wars differed from the actual film, or at least the final cut of the film. Today, we're going to do something similar with the radio drama. For those of you who remember, and for those of you who actually heard it, you know, live when it actually aired, this was something different. This was something a little weird in terms of it wasn't just, for example, I remember purchasing, you know, and you might have purchased it too, James, the record of the story of Star Wars, and you could kind of relive the story of Star Wars.
I listened to that till the needle broke. Do you know who narrated the story of Star Wars?
Oh, tell me. I know it's somebody very famous.
Roscoe Lee Brown. And I know that voice now. I actually can remember that voice from his narration. But the year before Star Wars came out, he was in Logan's Run, and he did the voice of Box.
Oh, my God.
The robot character.
Oh, I remember him.
That was my tie-in because I knew that voice from Logan's Run.
Oh, my God. Wow. Yeah, it was a very recognizable voice that kind of, you know, when you hear it, you're like, I know that guy. You're right. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And the format for that was basically, you know, clips from the movie, actual clips, sound clips, music, sound effects, everything, but the whole thing being narrated by someone else. So that's kind of how they put it together. This is completely different in terms of they're treating it, well, it's called a radio drama, and they're treating it like a radio play, like an old-timey kind of radio play. Now, I don't know if this is something, I mean, I know that in the past, that's how, you know, a lot of very popular shows on radio before television, yeah, I guess we're talking here the 30s or even the 40s, people would just listen to these radio presentations and plays of either popular things or completely original material.
Heck, War of the Worlds was the radio drama. You know, everything came from radio. I Love Lucy came from radio. You know, Milton Berle came from radio.
Right. And I don't know if this was a resurgence or what you want to call it, but from what I understand, the story, you know, very briefly, is that back in the 70s, obviously after Star Wars came out, a man named Richard Toscan, who was the Associate Dean of the University of Southern California School of Performing Arts, was interested in maybe doing something having to do with a radio drama of Star Wars, which is somewhat of an, you know, Star Wars was huge. Obviously, when it exploded, it exploded. But just the idea of doing radio dramas wasn't a very popular thing to do. But that's something that he had considered doing, and he approached his, you know, higher-ups and suggested it. And for this thing to happen, two very important things needed to get taken care of. Number one is getting the rights to do it. You couldn't just out of the blue decided to do it and just produce it on your own because you needed Lucas's permission or the rights. And the other thing is you needed a budget because if you were going to hire actors, specifically the level of actors that he wanted, it was going to require some serious bucks. You know, somebody had to write this thing, somebody had to direct this thing. So the first thing that was apparently done and done successfully was acquire the rights. The story goes that he paid $1 to George Lucas for the rights to produce this thing. And obviously, because Lucas was an alumni of USC, it was kind of like a like a freebie. It was like
giving back to the community.
Yeah, it was kind of giving back to the university and you know, here, you guys can have the rights, just, you know, make it good, that sort of thing. The next part was a little more difficult, getting funding. Initially, the idea was to use NPR, have it done with funds from National Public Radio. But National Public Radio didn't have apparently enough of the funds that were needed in order to produce this specific thing. The estimates are somewhere in the $200,000+ range. And we're talking about 1981 here, because even though Star Wars came out in 77, they couldn't get this thing going until about 1981. So the way that they made it work was they had to get basically a co-sponsor, a secondary corporation, if you will, or company, to help fund the money needed to get this thing done. And the way they did it was they approached the BBC. So the deal they worked out with the BBC was that obviously NPR and the BBC would share in terms of being able to play this completed product, but there were some demands that the BBC wanted. The BBC wanted apparently their own director, a British director, who ended up being John Madden, who at the time wasn't as huge as he kind of became later in time. John Madden, you guys might recognize his name. He won an Academy Award for Shakespeare in Love.
Yeah, this is not John Madden, the football coach.
No. No. This
I don't want anybody getting fooled.
No, this man is from England. And even most recently, I think he directed Best Marigold Hotel and the sequel that is out right now, the second Best Marigold Hotel. Yeah. So again, he might not be a complete superstar, but the man does have an Oscar under his belt. But again, not at the time. So that was one of the requirements for the BBC to help fund this project. The other requirement was that they wanted to be able to get their own writer. So apparently they started work on this thing. They started writing it. I'm not sure exactly the name of the person that was writing it from the British side, from the BBC side. But apparently they were not very happy. Richard Toscan, the guy, again, from USC, was not very happy what he was getting back in terms of the writing style. It didn't seem to have the flavor of Star Wars. They were using the right names and they were using everything correctly, but it just didn't seem to flow right. So the agreement that they had to modify was to bring in a more seasoned Star Wars writer, and this is where they ended up tapping into the EU, and by that I mean a writer who was already used to writing Star Wars novels.
Yeah.
And around that time, the name of Brian Daley popped up because of his Han Solo novels that he wrote, I think 3 of them.
Han Solo at Star's End.
Yeah. Did you read any of those?
Sure. And it was, I didn't go through all 3. I kind of, by the third one, kind of just skimmed through it. I own it. But yeah, after Splinter the Mind's Eye, the next one that came out was Han Solo at Star's End. Mm-hmm. So it was like, again, as we've always said, we were like sponges. Anything Star Wars related that we could grab. So with that, Han Solo and I think the Millennium Falcon was on the cover with Han and Chewie. It was like a light blue cover, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, that's how I knew the name Brian Daley. So now with Brian Daley, they had a more amicable, if you will, seasoned Star Wars writer, let's say. He knew the characters at the very least,
Right, he knew how to write. Yeah, obviously. So the next step was assembling a cast. Now, the ideal situation was to get everybody, get all the original actors. And for many reasons, they couldn't get all of them. They were able to get a few of them. So we'll go through a little bit of the list of some of the names we might recognize. But Mark Hamill they were able to get him. So easily, he was Luke Skywalker. They had an actress named Anne Sachs as Princess Leia. Perry King, which if you guys remember him from Riptide, he ended up playing Han Solo. Now, tell us what's ironic about him playing Han Solo, James.
Well, he auditioned for Han Solo.
That's right.
And, it wasn't a terrible audition. He very easily could have had the role. I think Harrison Ford had the, got the jump on it because of his experience with Lucas. And I just think, Harrison Ford wound up being,
right.
Fate making him the best choice. But yeah, Perry, there's video out there, black and white video of Perry King, doing his Han Solo.
Yeah, amongst dozens of actors, he was one of them. And he didn't get the role, but somehow
if you look
made
hard,
it back.
Look for Burt Reynolds, yeah. Han Solo.
He does a pretty good job, but again, if you're familiar with him, it's a little difficult because it kind of, I keep remembering Riptide and I keep remembering his character, so it's a little difficult. But every now and then, if you concentrate enough, you can it kind of works.
He was a little too surferish, I would say. in my mind when I see the old footage.
Let's see. We had also Bernard Behrens as Obi-Wan Kenobi, which sounded pretty good too. He had the British accent.
Yeah, he wasn't terrible. He just had a bit of an affectation that annoyed me every now and then when I'd start to want to hear Alec Guinness, and I heard this guy. I think he did a good job though.
Right. Now with Darth Vader, obviously they couldn't get James Earl Jones, but they got Brock Peters. Now, let's first mention who he is, because he is a known name to us.
Let's give his pedigree, because first of all, he was in one of the greatest movies ever made, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
And let's just say, if you are a Star Wars fan and you've never seen To Kill a Mockingbird, well, get your butt out there and find To Kill a Mockingbird, and you should probably read the book too. But the movie To Kill a Mockingbird is fantastic. It's one of the best movies ever made. Anyway, so he's in that.
Yeah.
Eventually, he's in Star Trek as Admiral Cartwright.
That's right.
He's Sisko's father in some of the flashback episodes. Or actually, no, they weren't even the flashback episodes. He was really Ben Sisko's father in the regular episodes. And he had a huge, long career. I mean, he's in tons of stuff. You would recognize him. Once you see him and you see his face and you know him, and then if you hear his voice, it's icing on the cake.
His performance is a little sometimes hard to get used to, because it does seem to be a little over the top, way over the top, over dramatic, and we will talk about some of these very dramatic scenes.
Princess Leia. Oh boy.
Yeah, it's a little too much. Like I said, we're going to mention those when we hit those particular scenes. C-3PO, Anthony Daniels, perfect. They got the right guy.
Ironically, Anthony Daniels has been C-3PO in every incarnation of Star Wars.
He's always available.
Including the radio drama. This guy does not want to let anybody else be C-3PO, and God bless him.
Right. And the rest of the cast are the majority of them are pretty much unknown actors. There's only a few more that I would just kind of mention the names because it's a name you might recognize. Adam Arkin, the son of Alan Arkin.
Yeah, and Adam Arkin had a pretty good career as an actor.
He had a pretty long run. He plays Fixer, one of Luke's friends. And David Alan Grier, if you guys remember David Alan Grier, who's a very popular comedic actor, plays one of the cantina patrons that talked to Ben into using Han Solo for the mission. And we'll talk about that a little later.
You know who I noticed, and I didn't realize while I was listening, because he's in so many things and he can disguise his voice pretty well. David Paymer. He's a comedian. He's a comic actor. He kind of has a Costanza-ish look about him. But, he's pretty well known. And if you look him up, you've seen him in stuff. And, he was he was the press secretary in American President, if you happen to remember that movie with Michael Douglas.
Okay.
Another name I noticed in the credits was Jerry Hardin. Now, Jerry Hardin is known for a lot of stuff. He was in The Brady Brides, and he was in Star Trek The Next Generation playing Mark Twain. But something he was not really known for, but known once I say it, he was Deep Throat in X-Files, if anybody remembers that, the character of Deep Throat.
Oh, yeah, okay, I remember him. I remember that actor, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, he's done a ton of things, and he's an actor that you do recognize, but again, this is just his voice. And the other one was Meshach Taylor, who wound up being in Designing Women, who may or may not be a fan favorite, but he was popular on, he was popular on that. He recently died, so.
Okay. One of the things I remember also reading about that, it's they didn't have a lot of time. This was broken down, I think, into something like 12 or 13 episodes, like about a half hour a piece, more or less. So they really didn't have too much time under the budget they were working on. So one of the things that you notice when you listen to it, it's not super, super polished in terms of the way that the lines are delivered and the reactions. It's I don't want to say it was rushed, but it wasn't like when they make a movie and they can spend months and months and months. They had X amount of time, to be in the studio to record these lines, and they had to just knock them out as quickly as possible. So there is a different pace. You'll definitely notice a different pace to a lot of this stuff. The other thing that they also tried to minimize was the use of earthly phrases, the terminology and stuff like that. And that's something that the writer, again, Daly had to kind of keep going and hitting and changing lines because they didn't want to have things sound too earthy. So that's pretty much how this thing came about. And like I said, they put it together in 1981. and they were able to air it a number of times. Apparently, they were able to at least repeat it once or twice. I don't remember when I heard it. I never heard the entire thing on the radio, but I do remember one day flipping through the dial and running into the Attack on the Death Star scene, and I'm like, what am I listening to? Why am I hearing Star Wars coming over the radio?
So you actually heard it over the real radio?
I heard it over the real radio, but I couldn't tell you if it was the original broadcast, the 81, or maybe a repeat broadcast later on that they did. But again, I didn't listen to the whole thing. I only heard it was the last episode because it was the Death Star attack. And it was a fluke. I was not aware of it ahead of time. It wasn't the type of thing where I heard about it even on Starlog magazine and then, try to seek it out. It's not, again, no internet. Without the internet back then, we were just, flapping in the wind.
Well, I knew it existed from Starlog magazine, and I always thought I would be able to hear it on the radio. I have a pretty good memory, and I don't feel I ever got to hear it, an actual presentation on the radio. But, I do, like I said, I do remember it. I do remember they were, promoting it on different, fan type, maybe the Fan Club magazine and stuff like that.
Now, because this is Star Wars, the original first film, just like anything else, just like in the comic book that we were talking about a number of episodes ago, this is the one that has the biggest amount of bonus material, if you will. Deleted scenes, expanded scenes, that sort of thing, because this is where you're building the story from scratch. So let me start going through some of these different sequences throughout the movie and how they are different than the movie that we all see and have seen.
Well, I'd like to just interject here that having heard it now, I found a lot of things that are appearing elsewhere and have made their appearance elsewhere. And that impressed me. Had I listened to it back then, I might have missed a few things, but I was more keen on picking them out now because of, the Rebels and the new movies and some of the stuff that you've been buying, And
we'll point these out as we go along so we can kind of say, wait a minute, this sounds familiar, that kind of stuff. Anyway, the story itself, as far as the radio goes, and again, remember, this is 13 episodes, so episode 1 of this 13 episodes starts with Luke is listening to a commercial about the Academy, and he's kind of listening to it and kind of reacting to it because they try to, from the beginning, kind of plant the idea in your mind that he's restless and he wants to get the hell out of there, and the Academy is always something that he's trying to get.
And I still feel like this Academy is going to lead him to no good because I think this is the Imperial Academy.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
It might be just a space flight academy.
Right, it's a general academy, but it's basically a pecking ground for Imperial officers. Luke is met up by Wendy, a friend of his.
These are all like kind of the cut scenes that everybody thinks they saw, but never really did. But this is like, part of the Biggs crew and, the stuff that the Tashi Station stuff.
Right. His friend Wendy comes over to visit, and he kind of embarrasses him a little bit about, listening to these commercials about the Academy and yada, yada, yada. So they both get on the Skyhopper and they travel to Anchorhead to meet up with the friends.
Do they call Luke by his nickname in this radio drama? I can't remember.
Wormy? No. What is it?
Yeah, Wormy. Yeah, that's
is it Wormy? I don't remember if they call him
I don't
Wormy
remember
or not,
either.
but I do remember that name for some reason.
Yeah, he was not thought of highly with his friends. He was kind of like a bit of a nerd.
Right. And what happens is that the way that they establish this is that at Anchorhead, we meet Fixer, we meet Cammy. Biggs obviously is not there, but we hear about Biggs. And Fixer is he's kind of established as he's kind of like the big shot, the guy who brags. Kid. He's the cool bad boy. And he's especially very popular now because Biggs is not around. And they kind of make it very clear that Luke seemed to be missing Biggs and Biggs is not around. So Fixer is kind of like, kind of slightly bullying people around and that sort of thing. He's the big shot. Yeah. Cammy is Fixer's girl. And Winnie and Deke are kind of like two followers, two guys who just do whatever Fixer tells them to do.
Yeah, this is just a clique, some cool kids and some not so cool kids.
And they all kind of tease Luke about the Academy and this and that and the other. And as a result of their little kidding around and teasing, Fixer challenges Luke to a race using their Skyhoppers.
This is like a cutscene which never really was even filmed.
Right. No. This is like pre-big scene that this was never filmed. In the radio show, at least, and again, we heard it before, they introduced the concept of, they're going to race around Beggar's Canyon. Okay, Beggar's Canyon. I know what you're talking about now. So Luke has this race with Fixer, and he wins the race by threading the needle. And by that, what they mean by that is, in the canyons, there's these rock formations that if you kind of go through the middle of the formation, like a hole in the formation, you're threading the needle with your skyhopper, and Luke is able to do it and beat Fixer by taking that little shortcut. However, in the process, he damages his own skyhopper, and that gives us the background again in the film of why we don't see Luke, flying around his skyhoppers, because as a result of this kind of drag race that he had, it damaged.
Yeah, it's in the background of his workshop.
Right, that's why he has to use the land speeder, during the movie. The next morning, we get to meet Owen and Beru for breakfast. Again, we don't see this in the movie. This is different. And we start to get the vibe of how the relationship works. Owen is this grumpy old guy who's giving Luke all his chores. Beru is the kind of like the caring aunt who defends Luke. And, Owen, don't be so rough on him and that sort of thing. So Luke is also given his chores by Owen, and he takes the Treadwell droid, one of these little funky-looking droids that they have, to work on some of the moisture evaporators, the famous moisture evaporators. So he goes out there to start working on them. Now, this is the scenes that actually ended up showing up as deleted scenes later on. These are actually filmed scenes that we're dealing with. They never made it to the final cut, but they are available on the Blu-ray, and on YouTube you can find them. Yeah. Luke is fixing the evaporators, and all of a sudden he spots something in the sky. He gets on his macro binoculars and looks up, and he sees what looks like to be some kind of space fight. Some ships, two ships, maybe shooting at each other or something like that. Luke heads back to Anchorhead to tell his friends what he just saw. And as he runs back into that area where his friends are hanging out, this time Biggs surprises him because he happens to be visiting. According to Biggs, he has been just assigned to the Rand Ecliptic. Ooh, he's like the third mate in this ship or something. And he's kind of there to say goodbye to everybody because he's about to kind of ship off, into his first official assignment after being in the academy. Luke kind of convinces them, all right, but guys, outside, I saw this thing. So they all go outside and they all look up in the sky. And at that time, the battle is over.
Yeah, they just see a couple of ships. They're like, oh, it's like then it's more like the movie. Oh, they're just refueling. You don't know what you're looking at, blah, blah, blah.
Right. And they kind of laugh him off. But Biggs is still Biggs is a little more understanding and tells Luke, listen, can we go for a walk? Can we go for a ride? I want to talk to you about something. So while they're out there, having their private time, this is where Biggs tells Luke the whole story about him, that he's done with the training and now he's going to join he's got a friend who knows somebody in the rebellion and he's thinking of joining them. And that kind of gives us, again, that deleted sequence, that entire deleted sequence. The story then continues pretty much like we heard it before in terms of what's happening. Now, after we meet Luke and his background, we jump to Leia, and we get a little bit of her background. Leia apparently is on a mission to the planet Raltier, I think the name of it is. She's on the Tantive 4, and she's supposed to be on a humanitarian mission. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? She's supposed to be delivering medical supplies to this planet that needs help, yada, yada, yada. But in reality, she is really smuggling supplies to some rebel cells around there. We also meet Lord Tyon, who is a character that, as far as I can tell, is completely made up for this. I don't remember ever hearing anything about him. And he's this kind of swarthy guy who's always flirting with Leia. And, he's telling her, oh, we had to declare a state of emergency in this planet because of all the ruffians, that are causing problems for the Empire. And apparently Vader is in the vicinity of that area. So, stay in your ship because we're taking care of these nasty rebels, yada, yada, yada. And as they are about to depart, her ship, they are approached by somebody who is apparently wounded. And he apparently is probably a rebel. And he has some information that was put under this person through hypnotic implants. So the guy doesn't even know what the information is, but he has it and he wants to give it to Leia. Vader catches up with Leia and he's very distrustful of her in terms of, what her real mission is, which obviously, we kind of know what her real mission is. But she's able to get out of there anyway, with this wounded person hiding in her ship. When Leia gets back to Alderaan, she briefs her father on, what just happened, this person we just met. Now, one of the unusual things is that in the story, her father is not called or at least is not referred to as Bail Organa. He's referred to as Prestor. Now, I think that might be kind of like his middle name or his first name or something like that, but it is supposed to be her father. And again, I'm not sure why they decided not to go with that other name. I don't know if Bail came later in the history of how Star Wars was written. I don't remember. Was Bail ever used in Star Wars? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think in the novel, I always knew the name Bail Organa. So I don't know where I picked that up exactly, but you sure it wasn't mentioned here?
I don't remember in the movie hearing the word Bail. And that's maybe, I mean, we know her last name is Organa.
I knew that name, Bail Organa, before the prequels. So, and also knew the other guy's name was Bail Antilles. And I'm like, really? Is that the only name they can come up with? But it's probably like John, you know?
Well, Captain Antilles. They refer to him as Captain Antilles all the time.
But we heard the name Bail Antilles, too. I think, I think it came up in some of those other writings that we used to read.
But this name Prestor, I've never heard that before, as far as I can tell. Anyway, she talks to her father and gives him all the information of what just happened. And her father is able to kind of debrief and get, and be able to talk to this wounded rebel. And the guy gives the information. They extract the information out of him that the Empire is building a new weapon, codenamed Death Star. So they don't know exactly what this thing is. They only know that the code name for it is Death Star. Okay, that's interesting. Lord Tyon again visits Alderaan unexpectedly, and they kind of have to dance with him in terms of letting him kind of have his way of kind of visiting and talking to them, because they just want to get rid of him.
It sounded like this guy was a bit of a bounder or something,
Well, he suggests
he wanted to get some time with Leia.
Exactly.
I think he wanted to,
he's
the
actually
old, do the hokey dokey.
Yeah, he's actually suggesting to her father, if we could form a union between our families, hint, hint, I could protect you from, any imperial problems, and your daughter would benefit from his riches because he's probably going to become a very popular, a very powerful imperial agent or whatever. So he's basically trying to buy his daughter from him.
If you whore your daughter out, I may be able to entertain you,
Basically.
It just kind of made me a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, and Leia obviously is not reacting very well to this, and she's always kind of like fighting with him in terms of, verbally assaulting him more or less. And in one of these back and forths, she kind of lets it slip that, because he's talking about, I'm going to get a promotion pretty soon because I'm working on this secret project. And she kind of lets it slip. Is it a Death Star or something? And all of a sudden, the guy freaks out. He's like, wait a minute, how do you know that code name? Nobody knows that code name. And he kind of starts putting it together that she must have gotten some information from the rebels, and a fight breaks out, and he's accidentally shot by Leia or Bail or both of them or something like that. And they kind of realize, okay, well, we got to dispose of this body. So they kind of arrange so that it will be as if he had a hunting accident at some game preserve or something, and they're going to kind of hide the body away or something. And at that point, her father, realizes also, okay, there's another mission that's taking place, and I have to go participate in this mission to get this information. Somebody actually has the plans to this new weapon, and we have to get the plans into the hands of the rebels. So I'm going to go get these plans. And Leia's like, no, let me do it because, I'm already in this. I want to do it. You have to stay here, blah, blah, blah. She kind of talks her father out of getting too involved in that manner.
Yeah.
And he says, all right, well, here's the coordinates. Here's where you have to go. But also, when you have the plans, I want you to stop at Tatooine and pick up Obi-Wan Kenobi, General Kenobi, because we need his help. At this point in the game, we have to involve him in this. So the mission starts, and they're on their way there, and we now meet C-3PO and R2-D2. They're apparently just regular droids who are being assigned as part of the droid worker pool. They're being given their assignments.
Well, that's not knowing the backstory that we eventually get. Yeah, we just think they're just droids on this ship. Right.
And they didn't want to get too specific, from what I understand, with the script in terms of saying that they met there for the first time, because they knew that Lucas had an idea of these characters being part of a possible prequel set of stories. So they didn't want to say, oh, look, they're meeting here for the first time. They just happened to be assigned in the same area. So that's how they kind of happen to be together. And the assignment that they're given by Captain Antilles, he introduces them to Leia and says, all right, your mission is when we reach this certain area, there's going to be a ship near us that's going to kind of like send us via like download these special plans. And the way we're going to do it is R2-D2 is actually going to climb to the hull of the ship and retrieve these plans as if he's repairing the hull of the ship. He's going to be pretending to be repairing something, but in reality, he's accepting these plans. Yeah. Now, this is where the red flag goes off a little bit. If we remember Phantom Menace, all the astromech droids are going to the hull of the royal ship.
That's right.
To make repairs. So again, you think maybe they tapped into this a little bit to get ideas?
It's certainly not out of the question. I mean, Lucas takes from a lot of different places, and the writers themselves, I'm sure, had heard this.
The other thing that Antilles kind of programs into R2 and C-3PO is that as part of this mission for them, not only to retrieve the plans, they're supposed to help the princess in any shape or form to accomplish her mission. And that includes being able to lie or self-destruct if needed. So that kind of explains a little bit how or why a robot would kind of lie in a way, because you never address that. Do robots lie? They lie in Star Wars, and how do they lie?
They're not supposed to lie, right, according to Isaac Asimov.
Right, but I mean, here you're being kind of told that they just been giving very specific instructions.
Well, he was telling the truth from a certain point of view.
Not only do they lie, but they put themselves in jeopardy many, many times, where robots you would imagine wouldn't want to put themselves in jeopardy. So while R2 is downloading these special plans, the Tantive 4 is intercepted by the Devastator, which is a Star Destroyer commanded by Darth Vader. So they start firing on the Tantive 4. The Tantive 4 is, R2 gets the plans at the last minute, gets back in the ship. Okay, let's get the hell out of here. They jump into hyperspace and they fly out and arrive at the orbit in Tatooine, getting ready to now go pick up Obi-Wan. But before any of that can happen, the Devastator catches up to them somehow. Antilles suspects that there might have been a spy on board, because how could they have found them so fast, especially after, jumping through hyperspace?
It was a little unclear.
So when they realize that they're going to be overtaken, that they cannot defend themselves against the Devastator, Antilles and Leia, what they do is they start ejecting escape pods randomly before getting the droids to go on another pod so that they can kind of use them as decoys before they really do set out, the real
I wasn't
pods.
Thrilled with that, but it made sense, when you try to say, well, geez, the pods are launching everywhere. How come they got away? And they're just,
right. And it's kind of a little scary if you think about it, the fact that they're wasting pods, not on people, but empty. They're just letting them go empty on purpose. Now, the other reason you might think about, it also becomes a little bit repetitive if you think about it, because that's the same thing that Han later does before arriving at the Death Star, is that they eject pods on purpose.
Supposedly.
To pretend so that the Imperials think that everybody has ejected, there's nobody in the ship, blah, blah, blah. We'll see. Now we jump a little bit forward we're in Tatooine, and we actually get to witness a different perspective of how the droids are captured. We see the entire thing from C-3PO's point of view, and that is C-3PO is captured by the Jawas. He's the one that gets also sucked through that vacuum hole that R2 gets sucked through. And, that's how they bring him into the ship, too. It's also stated here that C-3PO is the one that told the Jawas that my friend is over there. Why don't we go get my friend? And he inadvertently gets R2 captured too. Back in the Owen family farm.
The Lars homestead.
That's right. Owen tells Luke to send, because Luke is always trying to, again, he wants to go to the academy. I want to go to academy.
Well, he sure was a whiner.
Yeah, I'm academy. Oh, but we don't have enough help. Oh, well, maybe we should get some more droids. Okay, we should get some more droids. Okay, so Owen tells Luke, send out some signal flares tonight. This way, if some sandcrawlers are in the area, they can come by. Maybe we can buy some droids. So that's how the sandcrawler basically ends up the next morning at their farm, because of apparently a signal flare. Now, here's a good one that kind of somehow has made the rounds. When R2-D2 is being displayed for everybody to buy and nobody really wants to buy him and they instead they take the R5-D4, according to this story, R2-D2 tampers with R5-D4.
We always wonder if there was any, hokey doke going on. I'm not sure I buy this still, but it was pretty cool that they tried to work this in.
Yeah, I mean, it's cute. It's interesting. You could say, well, that R2-D2's he's got some chutzpah.
Or something else.
Well, in the
Big ones.
No kidding. In the story here, Luke also confirms through C-3PO that the battle that he saw through the Maki binoculars is the battle that these guys just came from. So it kind of confirms the fact that what he saw was real. C-3PO also implies that the only reason R2 showed him part of the message of Leia, help me Obi-Wan message, it was just he implies that it might have been just a trick to get the restraining bolt off of R2. Because he's always blaming R2 for everything. Oh, he's just a temperamental, droid and blah, blah, blah. Luke also tells C-3PO a story about how when he was younger, he and his friend Wendy got lost out in the dunes. They were riding a dewback, I believe, and somehow the dewback knocked them off, and they were like stranded in the desert.
Stole their money.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, this old guy, Ben Kenobi, came and kind of rescued them and brought them back to the farm. So that's how he kind of knows Ben's name. Oh, is he the old hermit who used to live blah, blah, blah?
And we were always led to believe that, Ben was kind of floating around, keeping an eye on him,
right.
And, helping him out of some, if he was about to get himself hurt for real.
Yeah, and here Luke also confirms that when Ben brought them back to the farm, Owen was not very happy at all to see Ben. So there was some friction already, implied between those two.
And we always thought that they were related in some way. Obviously, it turns out they weren't. But
right.
Clearly still, Ben was, let's call him Obi-Wan, was a bit of a rogue when it came to Owen and Beru, because they know what was going on with the Jedi,
well,
and then Obi-Wan shows up with baby Luke, that we eventually find out.
Right, that's again, much later.
But it makes more sense when we hear how they discuss him, right. Even in this extended version. We can extrapolate that has some,
But even in the movie, without knowing anything, there's some shenanigans are going on, because it's everybody's
bad blood.
Everybody's looking at each other when they mention the names, like, stop talking about him, don't talk about him, that guy is he's crazy, don't talk about him, that kind of stuff. Once we do actually meet Ben, and we're Ben's house, Ben makes a mention to Luke about we got to rescue the princess and yada yada yada, and she says, and he even mentions that even by now the Imperial Inquisitors are probably questioning her right now.
And this is what I thought was so fantastic, because
here we go, red flag.
I was listening to this in the middle of the first season of Rebels,
okay,
which had the character of the Inquisitor.
Yeah.
And knowing all the things that Filoni has talked about and some of the other creators of Rebels, and how they said they've gone to Star Wars' past and a lot of the archives and a lot of the Macquarie and things like that, which are all very important to guys like you and I.
I had never heard the word Inquisitor before.
Exactly. And I was very excited in a way to hear that's where they kind of picked this up. There's no question that that's probably where they picked this up.
Yeah. I mean, again, if we might be wrong, maybe there's an EU novel out there with the name Inquisitor in it. I don't know. But it just, like I said, the red flag went immediately up when all of a sudden it's like, what?
I'm going with it that it was a calculated addition by picking it up from the radio drama. I'd like to really talk to Filoni someday, and I know he talks a lot and he lets a lot of people know where he gets his ideas from and stuff, but I would just like to take a list and actually hear it come out of his mouth to me.
Yeah,
someday
that would be good. We're Mos Eisley now, and we actually get to go in the cantina, and we're going to meet Han Solo. But before meeting Han Solo, Ben approaches a different patron, who is the one that I mentioned earlier, that is played by David Alan Grier. Approaches him about hiring a ship, and the guy says, oh, I'm busy, I'm already booked. He's like, but, if you talk to that guy over there, the Wookiee, his partner Han Solo might be available.
And this was a departure from, obviously, what eventually becomes Ben and Chewbacca's relationship. at least as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and but it fits well. In other words, if you watch Star Wars, the way the movie's edited, the way that the cantina sequence is edited, it's in the middle of a conversation where Ben is like, "Oh, this is so and so. He knows somebody. He has the access to the blah blah blah."
Isn't Ben talking to Bo Sheck anyway, or something like that?
It's like it's a handoff to another person type of thing, and it fits well with this. With this particular EU invention of another thing happening before that. Now, what's also interesting is that what they do here is that while R2-D2 and C-3PO are outside the cantina because they gotten thrown out, the minute they walked in there, they already see stormtrooper action happening outside. So they
this
have
was
to
kind of weird, this part.
Yeah, they got to go and hide somewhere. So what they find is a used droid lot, and they kind of pretend to be maintenance droids for hire. But when the guy who owns the lot, I think, realizes these guys are not mine, they have to kind of leave there, so they have to find a new place to hide.
And he kind of has a silly voice, that guy, too.
Yeah, they kind of mess around with that a little bit. Greedo approaches Han Solo, and he makes references not only that to Jabba, that, Han Solo owes Jabba money, blah, 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 but he also makes references to two other characters, Heater and Preacher, who are supposed to be Jabba's thugs, debt collectors, that sort of thing.
Now, remember the scenes we originally saw in that PBS Jedi documentary, and then with the Declan, whatever his name was, the actor who originally was going to play Jabba, and then when they use that same scene, there are two other characters with him, and then they CGI Boba Fett into, or however they stick Boba Fett into the scene too. I wonder if one of those guys, that was his real name. That was his
I don't know.
name.
That's a good question, but we are going to come back to these two names in a few minutes because this is where they make a change that's pretty significant. Ben basically tells Luke, listen, we got to sell your land speeder. We got to get the hell out of here because we got to give Han Solo the down payment. And in here, Ben uses the Jedi mind trick to be able to get a little more money than originally intended, to get the 2,000 credits that they need. So he's able to do that. Ben also feels that he's being watched, that somebody's watching him. We never get to actually see, again, this is radio, or hear the snitch that we do see in the movie. But I guess the way they do it is by Ben having a feeling that he's being watched, and I guess that's what maybe it's supposed to be. We now meet another character that we never met before called Squeak, who has also a very unusual high-pitched voice talking to Solo about, hey, I got a job for you, blah, blah, blah. And Solo is like, no, I just, he at first is gonna take it, and he's considering, blowing off Luke and Ben. But he changes his mind and says, you know what, I already committed to this job. I'm going to take it, maybe next time, yada, yada, yada. So it kind of, I guess they're trying to establish early on that Solo is, he's a pirate, but he also has certain code that he lives by, job, I do my job and blah, 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 that kind of thing. We now see Solo at Docking Bay 94 prepping the ship. And this is the scene you were talking about earlier. This is the scene where Jabba, the cut scene, later in the special edition, they added it back on, and the whole confrontation with Jabba. But here, in the radio drama, instead of Jabba being the person confronting Solo, it's Heater confronting Solo. And he's basically delivering the majority of Jabba's lines. Obviously, he's not pretending to be Jabba, but he's the guy who works for Jabba, who's like, when are you going to pay Jabba? You're a wanted man, blah, 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 all those lines. Han, my boy, all that stuff. Which is kind of weird. I
wonder what the deal with that was.
Yeah, I don't understand why.
Because that existed, and he probably was at that point a couple of years away from Star Wars. They're already into the Empire years, so they know that the job. I mean, I don't know. I don't know why they would have kept that from.
Yeah, it's a weird thing, and you have to also remember that as these things are written,
maybe by that point they knew. I mean, I can't remember the timeline of when Jabba was definitely going to appear in Jedi, and this is what, 81-ish?
81.
So I don't know if those guys had a plan already, It's
Plus, what I was saying is this script is being approved by Lucasfilm. I assume,
yeah, but I can't remember the timeline of when they were going to definitely have Jabba as a character, again, like bring him back into it.
Well, The other thing I hear that's happening is, once again, as the droids are approaching Docking Bay 94, they also run into stormtroopers again, and they have to actually hide in somebody's house. And they, again, pretend that they're offering a free trial service to any customer. They'll repair
that
some
was kind of silly.
units.
I mean, I laughed, but it was kind of silly.
And in the movie, we basically see them
Just
opening a door and coming
door.
out of the door, that kind of thing. So it's like, all right, fine, whatever. Now we can jump now to Vader's ship. The Devastator is approaching the Death Star, and he brings Leia up, his prisoner.
Oh, this is my favorite scene.
To see no, this is the beginning of your favorite scene. To see the Death Star approaching, and he's telling her about how intimidating, this weapon it is, and how everybody's gonna, bow down before, that kind of stuff, to kind of scare her. And she's, whatever. The interrogation. Now, this is one of the kookiest, and I'm sure when you mentioned Brock Peterson's performance, this is one of the highlights of this. Leia's being interrogated by the torture droid. One of the funny things about it is that they inject her with like a truth serum, and Vader is interrogating and interrogating and interrogating. Now, ironically, on a certain point of the interrogation, Vader is kind of pretending to be her father. Your father wants you to know, what are those rebel plans? This is for your father. And it's like, but he is her father.
Well, he doesn't know, but yeah.
But you don't know this in 81 because 81 is Empire time.
That's why it's so much better that we waited and listened to it in entirety now, because we can put it together a lot better.
But the delivery of his lines during that particular torture scene, first of all, she's screaming her head off like a horror movie.
Are you gonna let me reenact?
Go ahead.
You're getting hot. You're burning up. Oh, you're getting hotter. Oh.
I actually wrote here on my notes, it's borderline pornographic.
Yeah, I didn't want to get carried away, but it's like a rape.
It's so out of content.
Just his voice, like I'm doing a pretty good Brock Peters too. Oh, I'm making you so moist. Oh, it's like, stop already. I mean, I'm driving. I'm like, I got to pull over. It's getting hot in here.
There's a reason why the movie, they just close the door and fade to something else.
Leave a little bit to the imagination. Save some room for the Holy Ghost. I don't know what's going on.
Well, here's another scene that again helps to build a little of the background. Enough of Brock, please. Enough, Brock. To help a little build the background of Grand Moff Tarkin, General Mahdi, I think his name was General. Was he a general?
Admiral Mahdi.
Admiral Mahdi. He seems to have certain conversations with Tarkin, kind of suggesting that.
Oh, these guys, yeah, they've got their own little side thing going on.
Yeah, he suggests to Tarkin a number of times that, listen, this station is so powerful that all this power is at your fingertips, and even though the Emperor is in charge, he is the guy who actually is, pushing the buttons and having all the powerful moves. So he's kind of starting to lay the seeds for, one day you might want to make your move and that sort of thing.
And we've talked about this before, and I feel that's apparently what Admiral Yularen was there for. He was so respected by the Emperor because, I guess, of their relationship going back,
I don't know.
When he was Palpatine, if you believe all that he was there to make sure nobody was trying to usurp the power of the Death Star and use it against the Emperor.
And even Tarkin, the way that the actor portrays Tarkin, he's kind of saying, but we'll have to all remember that we're here to serve the Emperor. But the way that he delivers the lines, he delivers them almost ironically in terms of sarcastically, I wouldn't dream of such a thing. But
wink, wink.
Yeah, exactly. It's wink, wink. We're here for the good of the Empire. That kind of BS type of delivery. Vader is also kind of upset when Tarkin decides to target Alderaan as the first planet to destroy. Not so much upset because he's about to blow everybody up, but he seems a little upset at the fact that he's doing it without the Emperor's direct permission. Yeah. So Vader is kind of starting to see that the Tarkin is kind of taking control in his
Some
own
liberties.
Yeah, he's going a little overboard with his powers, I guess. On the Falcon, on the way to the Death Star, Luke begins basic Jedi training procedures, not just playing with with that floaty droid thing. Right. In the radio drama, we get to see more of basic stances and basic movements that obviously you don't have time to do in the movie. Because remember, his training, if you think about it, with Ben must have lasted like 3 or 4 hours. It's not like he spent days and days with Ben. He was only there for 1 day. After we leave the Death Star and we're now back into the Rebel Yavin 4 base, there are a number of incidents where Solo sounds kind of annoying at the fact that every other conversation he's having, he's like, okay, well, where's my money? Where's my money? Where's my money?
Yeah.
They play that pretty thick.
Like I said, that's the part of like Perry King was like, wow, come on,
I gotta
Joe,
get out of here. I gotta race ship. Oh my God, I hated the term race ship. It's supposed to be race sail.
It was just a little bit. He got a little bit carried away. Like he got a little bit too into the part, and by that point he had seen Han Solo. I mean, there was no need for him to reinvent a way.
Right.
He could do his own interpretation, but he was kind of like reinventing the character. Like instead of this character just kind of being reluctant, like he was just an out-and-out coward almost, or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm exaggerating.
No, but in the radio drama, Luke must have tried to convince them like 3 or 4 different times, and it's like you get to the point where you're like, Luke, dude, just chill out. He doesn't want to help you.
Yeah,
leave him alone.
Let him go. F him.
Now, here's something that's kind of neat and interesting. We have a scene where Luke runs into Biggs, but at this point, Biggs needs to give him a test, a simulator test, to see if he can handle the X-Wing.
But, here's what's funny. A lot of people don't realize it. I played the Lego Star Wars original trilogy game, and there's an element of this, not quite, but it's like you had to blow up. You had to blow up certain things as if you were, a gunner. And there's a segment similar to this in the Lego game, and so I could relate at least. I'm not saying it's from it or anything like that. It's just just pretty neat to have that tie-in.
Well, again, this is for the radio show, so I mean, I don't know if it's realistic that they would have time to actually put him in a simulator. And obviously, in this version, he gets like excellent scores, and that's why they allow him to
take over a ship.
Maybe that's part of the thing. It's like, do you really let a stranger who you really haven't seen pilot anything take one of your ships? Okay, he passed the test.
Yeah, I say
Fine.
yes for the sake of the movie. I say yes because Leia vouched for him,
right? And Biggs also vouches for him,
and eventually Biggs, because he didn't realize he ran into Biggs until a little bit into it already. But yeah, I mean, if Leia's vouching for you, you're getting a ship.
I only have 2 more quickie points here. Going back again to Tarkin and Marty. Marty again tries to convince Tarkin, this is such a good weapon we have now after the test they conducted and blew up Alderaan. He's all kind of like high on how well this thing functioned. And he even suggests to Tarkin that maybe he should be co-emperor.
And this is the same Marty that got choked out in the meeting. So he's pretty bold for a guy who's kind of been embarrassed.
But at the same time, he's saying, you know what? If you get rid of Vader, then things could be a lot easier for you. And now Tarkin is no longer even pretending it's for the good of the Emperor. No, he's kind of warming up to the idea at this point. And this is, again, during
You thought so? Yeah, you got that vibe?
I got the vibe that he's no longer even pretending to kind of rein Marty back in. At this point, he's just listening and quietly thinking to himself. And then later, right at the end of the movie or right at the end of the presentation, as the Death Star is about to blow up, Marty talks Tarkin out of departing from the Death Star in terms of
friends like that, huh?
You're the leader here. You cannot leave. It would look bad. It's this is your victory. You're gonna claim it. You got to stay here for it. And that's how at the end of the movie we hear my lord, should I have your ship standing by? No. It kind of makes it
triumph.
Right. It kind of makes it sound like he's reacting to what Marty was just telling him, that you can't leave. How could you leave?
Meanwhile, Marty's on the first ship out.
How funny would that be if he got out somehow?
Yeah. He's like Boltar. He's the guy, the president turns around and like, oh, where'd he go? He was right here.
Well, overall, like I said, I enjoyed it a lot in terms of, I mean, it's long. This is a 6+ hour endeavor if anybody chooses to take it. It's a half hour a pop, you know.
I thought at first it was going to be too much, but it starts to flow. It has a good flow to it ultimately. You know, if you're willing to, you know, after you get past that, you know, tie-on and stuff like that, you know, it's fun.
I kind of enjoyed it the most for the extra stuff. In other words, whenever we're in a scene that we've already heard, I'm more critical about it because I'm continually comparing it to the real scenes.
Exactly.
So it's easier for me to imagine the stuff that I've never seen before than the obvious, you know, oh, that doesn't sound like Han Solo, or that doesn't sound like this guy, that doesn't sound like that guy, you know, that kind of stuff.
When you feel like you're getting, you know, behind the scenes stuff, that's when it really, you know, hit.
And just like most of these other things, and as we continue with our other episodes, we are going to be examining the other movie adaptations. You know, with this, we are going to also examine the following radio dramas, The Empire Strikes Back, and later on they also did Return of the Jedi. And we will tell you some of the stories that are coming up in terms of how these things were made and, you know, the tragic end of Brian Daley's life and his association with this up until the last second. It's unbelievable when we get to the Return of the Jedi story. But I definitely recommend, you know, for Star Wars fans, again, we're about to get inundated with new, fresh Star Wars super canon material later this year. This is the type of thing that sometimes
at least know where it's all coming from originally, you know, the original stuff.
Sometimes we discover this stuff when the whole Star Wars universe is at a low. So we kind of start digging back and finding these little gems here and there. I definitely say try to listen to these things now before the end of the year, because once the end of the year comes with The Force Awakens, everybody's going to forget about this. Nobody's going to care because your mind is going to be racing every year to a new movie. And these things are out there. Not only did we both listen to the actual radio drama, but I also purchased the scripts. And what's interesting about the scripts is that the scripts actually have slight different modifications to the final airing of what we basically heard, because from what I understand, the second time they aired it, they slightly edited down a little tiny bit, so there's certain things you might not have heard if you heard it the second time. So the scripts
of the radio drama point out things that changed, even that they might have edited, is what you're
correct.
saying.
They point out certain lines might have been delivered differently in this, so forth and so forth. And it also has a lot of, you know, like the introduction has a lot of the making of part of how this came about. You know, I also had to dig back. You know, I was able to find my old Starlog magazines back from the 80s, and I was able to reread some of those articles from Starlog on the making of these.
What they were trying to say about it.
And these are great because Starlog, as I might have mentioned a while back, Starlog currently has their entire archives of their magazine run free online. You can read every single Starlog that existed.
And that's a treat because there was some good stuff. That's how that was our internet, as we mentioned in the show we did on Starlog.
And more recently, the Star Wars Insider had a couple of like anniversary. Oh, does anyone remember the Star Wars radio dramas? So there were a couple of articles that I was able to use from the Star Wars Insider to kind of put this together. Like I mentioned before, in a couple of future episodes, we're going to do Empire, which took place, I believe, 2 years after.
Around the time they were putting out Jedi.
Right. They put that in 83. And then we'll do Return of the Jedi. And that is a really strange one because of the fact that less money, less time, and they didn't put that one out until the 90s. I think it might have been 96, around the time where their special editions were coming out.
Yeah, that might have been going back to the well a little bit too late. You know, it wasn't terrible by any means, but, you know, it's by then a number of years have passed, and some of the characters who return, their voices even sound a little more tired.
Well, it was 13 years after Empire, so that's how long they took them to do it. But we will get to those stories in time when we actually reach those. But anyway, I want to thank James, first of all, for joining me today. in reliving this unusual version of Star Wars that I'm sure a lot of people have never even tried yet. It's there. You can actually get these on YouTube. At YouTube, you can get all these episodes. They're all out there. Or you can buy the CDs or the cassettes. These things were actually on cassette at one point even. And as usual, I'd like to thank you guys for listening, and we will see you here next time at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody. Arr!
Stand by alert. Death Star approaching. Estimated time to firing range, 15 minutes.
No legendary adventure of the past could be as exciting as Star Wars.
Here they come.
The more you see it,
Here's where the fun begins.
the better it gets.
Coming in too fast.
Star Wars, rated PG, starts tomorrow at a theater near you.
I want to go to Academy. I want to go to Academy. I want to.
You're getting hot. You're burning up.
It's borderline pornographic.